20번.
Many forms of research led naturally to quantitative data. A study of happiness might measure the number of times someone smiles during an interaction. And a study of memory might measure the number of items an individual can recall. After 1, 5, and 10 minutes. Asking people how many times in a year they are sad will also yield quantitative data. But it might not be reliable. Respondents' recollections may be inaccurate. And their definitions of sad could vary widely. But asking how many times in the past year were you sad enough to call in sick to work prompts a concrete answer. Similarly, instead of asking people to rate how bad a procrastinator they are, ask, how many of your utility bills are you currently late in paying? Even though you can afford to pay them? Questions that seek concrete responses help make abstract concepts clearer and ensure consistency from one study to the next.
21번.
The evolution of AI is often associated with the concept of singularity. Singularity refers to the point at which AI exceeds human intelligence. After that point, it is predicted that AI will repeatedly improve itself and evolve at an accelerated pace. When AI becomes self-aware and pursues its own goals, it will be a conscious being, not just a machine. AI and human consciousness will then begin to evolve together. Our consciousness will evolve to new dimensions through our interactions with AI, which will provide us with intellectual stimulation and inspire new insights and creativity. Conversely, our consciousness also has a significant impact on the evolution of AI. The direction of AI's evolution will depend greatly on what values and ethics we incorporate into AI. We need to see our relationship with AI as a mutual coexistence of conscious beings, recognizing its rights and supporting the evolution of its consciousness.
22번.
The best defense most species of octopus have is to stay hidden as much as possible and do their own hunting at night. So to find one in full view in the shallows in daylight was a surprise for two Australian underwater photographers. Actually, what they saw at first was a flounder. It was only when they looked again that they saw a medium-sized octopus, with all 8 of its arms folded, and its 2 eyes staring upwards to create the illusion. An octopus has a big brain, excellent eyesight and the ability to change color and pattern, and this one was using these assets to turn itself into a completely different creature. Many more of this species have been found since then, and there are now photographs of octopuses that could be said to be transforming into sea snakes. And while they mimic, they hunt, producing the spectacle of, say, a flounder suddenly developing an octopodian arm, sticking it down a hole and grabbing whatever's hiding there.
23번.
How much we suffer relates to how we frame the pain in our mind. When 1,500 meters runners push themselves into extreme pain to win a race, their muscles screaming and their lungs exploding with oxygen deficit, they don't psychologically suffer much. In fact, ultramarathon runners, those people who are crazy enough to push themselves beyond the normal boundaries of human endurance, covering distances of 50,100 kilometers or more over many hours, talk about making friends with their pain. When a patient has paid for some form of passive back pain therapy and the practitioner pushes deeply into a painful part of a patient's back to mobilize it, the patient calls that good pain. If he or she believes this type of deep pressure treatment will be of value, even though the practitioner is pushing right into the patient's sore tissues.
24번.
When I worked for a large electronics company that manufactured laser and inkjet printers, I soon discovered why there are often 3 versions of many consumer goods. If the manufacturer makes only one version of its product, people who bought it might have been willing to spend more money. So the company is losing some income. If the company offers 2 versions, one with more features and more expensive than the other, people will compare the 2 models and still buy the less expensive one. But if the company introduces a 3rd model, with even more features and more expensive than the other 2, sales of the 2nd model go up. Many people like the features of the most expensive model, but not the price. The middle item has more features than the least expensive one, and it is less expensive than the fanciest model. They buy the middle item, unaware that they have been manipulated by the presence of the higher-priced item.
25번.
On-screen, climate disaster is everywhere you look. But the scope of the world's climate transformation may just as quickly eliminate the climate fiction genre, indeed, eliminate any effort to tell the story of warming, which could grow too large and too obvious even for Hollywood. You can tell stories about climate change, while it still seems a marginal feature of human life. But when the temperature rises by 3 or 4 more degrees, hardly anyone will be able to feel isolated from its impacts. And so as climate change expands across the horizon, it may cease to be a story. Why watch or read climate fiction about the world you can see plainly out your own window? At the moment, stories illustrating global warming can still offer an escapist pleasure, even if that pleasure often comes in the form of horror. But when we can no longer pretend that climate suffering is distant in time or in place, we will stop pretending about it and start pretending within it.
26번.
As individuals, our ability to thrive depended on how well we navigated relationships in a group. If the group valued us, we could count on support, resources, and probably a mate. If it didn't, we might get none of these merits. It was a matter of survival, physically and genetically. Over millions of years, the pressure selected for people who are sensitive to and skilled at maximizing their standing. The result was the development of a tendency to unconsciously monitor how other people in our community perceive us. We process that information in the form of self-esteem and such related emotions as pride, shame, or insecurity. These emotions compel us to do more of what makes our community value us and less of what doesn't. And, crucially, they are meant to make that motivation feel like it is coming from within. If we realized, on a conscious level, that we were responding to social pressure, our performance might come off as grudging or cynical, making it less persuasive.
27번.
The common accounts of human nature that float around in society are generally a mixture of assumptions, tales, and sometimes plain silliness. However, psychology is different. It is the branch of science that is devoted to understanding people, how and why we act as we do, why we see things as we do, and how we interact with one another. The key word here is science. Psychologists don't depend on opinions and hearsay, or the generally accepted views of society at the time, or even the considered opinions of deep thinkers. Instead, they look for evidence to make sure that psychological ideas are firmly based and not just derived from generally held beliefs or assumptions. In addition to this evidence-based approach, psychology deals with fundamental processes and principles that generate our rich cultural and social diversity, as well as those shared by all human beings. These are what modern psychology is all about.
28번.
Punishing a child may not be effective due to what Álvaro Bilbao, a neuropsychologist, calls trick punishments. A trick punishment is a scolding, a moment of anger, or a punishment in the most classic sense of the word. Instead of discouraging the child from doing something, it encourages them to do it. For example, Hugh learns that when he hits his little brother, his mother scolds him. For a child who feels lonely, being scolded is much better than feeling invisible. So he will continue to hit his brother. In this case, his mother would be better adopting a different strategy. For instance, she could congratulate Hugh when he has not hit his brother for a certain length of time. The mother clearly cannot allow the child to hit his little brother. But instead of constantly pointing out the negatives, she can choose to reward the positives. In this way, any parent can avoid trick punishments. A trick punishment reinforces the unwanted behavior of a child, which implies that parents should focus on reducing the attention to negatives, while rewarding positive behaviors.